it would be very, very surprising if anything like that happened. I mean, it's obviously people are speculating in that sort of way, but I think that it's been such a big project for Europe that the idea of stepping backwards in any major way is really not on the cards at all.
Well, Chris, from your reading of it, is there a real possibility that Europe could drop the euro and head back onto their own currencies of old, the lira, the drachma, and so on?
Well, that's certainly not the signals in particular from Germany. I've thought that the language that we're hearing coming out of politicians is on the whole fairly committed to the euro, and you're always going to see problems and people not liking situations like bailing out other economies or supporting their debt. But the reality is that 10 years isn't a particularly long time, or 11 years for the euro, and like David, I think there's going to be an amazingly high level of commitment to keeping it going. Although the situation at the moment does highlight the weakness of having your currency locked in with the fate of a whole lot of economic regions, when the right thing to do would be to get a competitive devaluation.
Yeah,
that's a problem right now, but there's been lots of problems solved by the euro over that time since '99, since it began.
I mean, it's interesting with this. Is it the politicians who are going to finally get some rationality into this system, or is it simply the markets that are going to sort it out?
Well, markets will eventually sort it out, and we're seeing that right now with fiscally challenged economies getting hurt pretty hard with how much it costs to pay for their debt. But at the end of the day, if you look at economies like Greece, when they've racked up all this debt and they continue to want to, it's the same as a person living beyond their means. At some point in time, you have a day of reckoning, and for all of these fiscally challenged European economies, it's these really tough budgets getting pushed through, and the need to stick with them. That's going to be the thing which is going to happen and test everyone. So in that sense, it's an issue.
It's about political will, isn't it?
It's about political will and the people's wills to accept what's happening.
Now, David, where does this leave the British pound? Does it stand to strengthen from all this, ultimately?
Well, the British pound is able to float compared with the euro.
Yes.
So that if the British have had different problems, they've been able to solve them for themselves. So that what we've been seeing is that initially they were hit very hard and had to have a bigger fiscal input than other people. And therefore the pound went down quite a long way. But that's been then very good for the competitiveness of the UK. And the UK seems to be coming up. How fast these various countries will come up relative to each other is difficult to say. Because if we look at the past, the southern countries were the ones where there seemed to be the greatest opportunities to catch up the rest. So people were very keen to lend them money so that they could do that catching up, because they thought they'd make some money out of it.
Whoops, something went wrong.
I don't think it did. They did catch up.
Well, yes, but look at Greece now.
But I think people in the private sector have made plenty of money out of investing in Spain, Portugal, Greece, Italy.
So they've been pretty vibrant economies all the same. Yeah. Now, Chris, what about our exports to Europe? Do we benefit from a weaker euro, or is there some kind of hidden downside that we don't know about?
Well, no, what we want is strong consumers and strong economies to trade with. So we want the opposite. We want the European region to be performing very well, and the consumers there wanting to purchase our products, which when they're struggling like now is less likely. And we can see the opposite taking place when we look at China and their economy going amazingly well, and them buying our dairy products. Yeah. So we really want the opposite situation to what's occurring right now, and likewise in UK, their economy has struggled. The New Zealand dollar is very strong against the pound, and it makes it difficult to sell our products there.
Now, David, you've taken over the chair of the BNZ chair, I believe I should say, of finance at the Auckland University Business School. Congratulations on that. Now, one of your pet topics is financial literacy, or the lack of it. How do New Zealanders rate internationally in their understanding of the workings of money?
Well, this is the one requirement of the chair, which is that it should improve the financial literacy of New Zealanders. One can only try. I think the position here is pretty average among the advanced economies. I think the main problem is that you can see people lose money. And you say, well, surely that was unnecessary. If only they knew more, they wouldn't lose it in that sort of way through having rather unfortunate strategies, particularly by putting all their money in one place, which is relatively high risk.
What about our rural sector? Do you think farmers are a bit more savvy with their money than their commercial brethren would be in the towns?
Very much so. I mean, I think that if you're a farmer, you're used to there being really big fluctuations.
Yeah.
And you're used to being able to try and cope with those. So you can have 2 or 3 really bad years in a row, and you've got to be able to cope with that. Now, most of us don't run our lives like that. You had 2 or 3 bad years in a row, you know that you'd be in serious trouble almost immediately in the first year. And I think that this applies to countries as well. I think if they were used to these sorts of size fluctuations, they wouldn't be getting into the difficulties they're getting into now.
What are your plans in a practical sense for increasing financial literacy? I guess schools would be a good starting point, would they?
Well, I'm only 2 months into the job, so
Sure.
I'm not sure that I know all of the answers yet. Or at least I hope not, otherwise the job will be very short. But clearly schools is going to be a major area. But most of the population are adult, and I think that's really where we should be focusing, that they're the people who've got the money to lose or who've got the opportunity to provide for themselves. So I think that's really where a lot of the effort's got to go.
Perhaps through the banks. The banks could be charged with educating their customers a bit better.
Well, I don't think you need to charge banks with doing that. I mean, they realise that for themselves. I mean, they want to make sure that people can repay their loans, that people invest in their products. So banks are already very keen that something should be done.
Yeah, that's good. Chris, what are your thoughts on this as a banker? You must come across these issues on a daily basis, I guess, with people defaulting on loans and or at least getting into difficulty.
Well, I'd have to agree with David's comments about farmers being a little bit better on the risk assessment front. I worked in the investment community for a number of years, and one thing you found when you're out in the rural traps was that the farmers knew not to sell their sheep when prices were really low. They'd hang on for a better day, and they'd do the same with their investments, so they could cope better with negative returns. But on the flip side, farmers, like most of New-Zealanders, aren't so hot on the diversification front. We tend to
stick with what they know.
We tend to stick with what we know, and that can put us into a little bit of difficulty. And we see that, be it our fixation with residential property investment, or the farmer, buying the farm next door and essentially capitalising a lot of sunshine into land prices whenever you get a good season of payouts or prices. So, it's a little bit mixed, but the farmer's appetite and ability to deal with risk is certainly a strength.
Yeah. Now, the national-led government, Chris, has acted with considerable speed on the 60 recommendations from the Capital Markets Development Task Force, and they've set up the board very quickly of a new super regulator, the Financial Markets Authority. What's your take on this new regulatory body, and what's the chat in the business world about it?
Well, just building on what David was saying before, the financial literacy out there is a little bit concerning, and people have made some bad decisions over the years, and there's all sorts of issues, ranging from people's ability to inquire about what sorts of risks they're taking, through to the monitoring of the actual investment providers. And so having one clear body to oversee the regulation side of things, if they can send the right signals to investors and provide a good framework for the investment community to operate in, has got to be a good thing.
Now, David, just touching on your area of financial literacy, do you see this FMA as actually perhaps giving a bit more protection to those who know not what they do?
Oh, I think indeed. I mean, what we've learnt, I think, in the global financial crisis is that in many countries things have fallen through the cracks. They've had a number of separate regulators looking at different things, and people not looking at the whole picture, and nobody's responsibility to do something else.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even though Australia very carefully thought out what to do with the Wallace Commission and then created APRA and ASIC, even so, they still have their own turf.
Yeah.
And if you need more prudential regulation of what's going on in securities markets, then it's nobody's job. And so this idea of having something which covers the whole field, I think will be much more helpful to try and both protect people and better inform them.
Now, just finally and very briefly, Chris, the official cash rate. We've had predictions that Alan Bollard would probably put it up in July. Are you predicting a rise